Well, I will address climate change, which could also be referred to as climate disorder in the light of the mutations of the changes which are taking place. I will also discuss the management of wine production along with table grapes as well, because tomorrow there will be a demo in a table vineyard in the area of Genosa Marina. Now, why are we addressing climate change in viticulture? Well, there is a very important effect because wine growing areas with a vocation for wine production are deeply impacted by the thermal and water values. This is why some regions which are interesting for the production of wine, well, these are very important regions, Napa Valley, Bourgogne, Barolo in Italy, but also Apulia. Well, all these areas are deeply affected by these very strange climate trends, which have an impact on sprouting and on ripening as well. Well, the style of a wine is a function of the area's mesoclimate, and the years are showing a great variability. Vintages are different with very different values of acid content, malic acid, and also burnings, not only on the leaves, but also on the berries. This is why climate change can alter the style, potential, and the significance of a wine, which has a deep impact also on the taste and the preference of the consumer. Another important consideration is that global warming is asymmetrical. As the increase in the temperature has been greater during the night, the difference between the temperature, the day temperature and the night temperature, because this has an impact on the synthesis of anthocyanins and polyphenols. And on a lot of aromatic aspects, there is a strong impact which is determined by the temperature during the night. Climate change is really impacting the management of vineyards. So this is why we have to provide indications for the existing vineyards, but also for the vineyards to be. Well, these are some educations. We have a mean increase of 0.3, 0.6 degrees Celsius. What is really worrying is the warming of the water of the oceans, and the warming of the oceans of the water will give rise to other events. Forecasts about global warming are provide some specific indications with an increase of 1.4 degrees Celsius. But if we keep using fossil fuels, the mean rise of the temperature can even reach 5.8 degrees Celsius, with an impact not only on the plants but on the ecosystems. These are the differentiated effects of climate change according to the different areas. If we consider the Mediterranean area, there is an increased drought, decreased water availability, a deterioration of water quality, increased irrigation needs, and loss of biodiversity. So, what are the latest indications about the climate change? The warming of air, the warming of water will continue in the future ahead. So we cannot stop global warming. And these processes will have an impact on the CO2 concentration. In 30 years, we have passed from 250 parts per million of CO2 to 450 parts per million of CO2 concentration. which makes photosynthesis of plants more efficient, but it creates other situations because of this higher concentration of CO2. What is happening with viticulture? There is a translation in terms of latitudes and altitudes of vineyards. So vineyards are now grown again in Denmark, in the United Kingdom, and they have come back after the Roman Empire. This means that wine is produced both in the United Kingdom and in Denmark. There's also an extreme variation in the incidence of some pathologies and also the outbreak of new pests, which are now better adapted to this global warming. Next session, we'll discuss the increase in the presence of some leafovers, such as Jacobasca. There is also an impact on some technological aspects, for example, choose of barrels for winemaking. And there's also an effect on the growth dynamics of oak trees for the production of barrels, of barrique, of barrels. So there is a severe impact on different aspects. These are some other slides showing that viticulture is also practiced at higher altitudes. Climate indices will allow us to have an indication about the way the climate is impacting. A key factor is the mean growing temperature, which considers the period from sprouting to September, and areas are divided into mild areas, temperate areas, and so on and so forth. If we refer to Puglia, Puglia is not more a temperate area, but an extremely warm area, a hot area. Well, this is also the ideal temperatures are typical for every single variety. For example, if you consider Pinot or Gewürztraminer, the optimum temperature is between 12 and 15 degrees centigrade. It means that when the temperature rises, a lot of vineyards cannot be grown in the areas where they have been grown for years. So this is this shift. This is why it is also important to identify those varieties which are more resilient to climate change, or we could think of processes of genetic breeding regarding the rootstocks, regarding the varieties as a function of climate change. If we give a look at Zinfandel, which is our Primitivo wine, well, for Zinfandel, its ideal temperature is 18 degrees centigrade. But if we consider the data of 2022, 2023, this area of cultivation is the limit for the cultivation. I mean, Vitis vinifera can be grown, but the wine performances are strongly and profoundly modified. What has happened over the years when with the climate change? There has been an increase in the alcohol content. In Alsace, the alcohol content has increased by 2.5%, the same in Australia and in California. Alcohol content in wines has increased versus the need expressed by the market with wines, demand for wines with a lower alcohol content. And this is also due to the fact that wine is accused of being toxic. This is why these parameters are taken into account. So these are the thermal abnormalities in the different areas. And you see this temperature variation, which has reached 1.5 degrees Celsius, with an earlier sprouting, the plants which may suffer from late frosts. In 2025 in Puglia, late frosts have compromised the viticulture and other crops as well, such as almond and cherry trees. So higher damages due to late frosts that are impacting our crops. This is another detail about some regions in Puglia. The summation of active temperatures, the mean temperature and the thermal threshold is of about 10 degrees. There is an increase in the temperatures. For example, in Alberobello area, which is an area where white wines are produced, a variation is equal to 32%. There's a huge thermal difference, and this huge thermal difference has occurred in the last 50 years. And also ranking by Winkler, dividing the various areas according to the thermal values are highly differentiated. If you see here the predictions, you see the differences, 2041, 2060. And most of Puglia is now in very warm areas. Many areas which are now devoted to viticulture shall modify their orientation and their management. These are the two forecasts. So the one on the left, whereby emissions of greenhouse gases are reduced, and there is therefore a lower incidence of the temperature. And on the right side, if in a case of if fossil fuels are maintained, most of the Apulian territory will be characterized by temperature excesses. Well, this is a very interesting area. This is the hillside. It is about 500 meters above sea level. And the period that I examined, a strong variation of a lot of parameters is recorded. If you consider minimum temperatures, mean value 1970, 2010 was -5 degrees. These are values which were recorded also in April, when most vineyards were already sprouting. But there is an increase in the temperatures. There is also an increase in the temperature, and there is also an extremely differentiated variation in rainfall, with very dry years and years in which rainfall has a deep impact, especially during the sprouting and the flowering. It is the example of 2023. In the period from April to June, about 300 millimeters of rainfall were recorded, which represented an obstacle to the use of machines for the phytosanitary treatment, especially if the soil tillages were carried out with the traditional means. So, which means that with this variable rainfall, with this concentrated rainfalls, with high intensity rainfalls, 2 years ago, 200 millimeters of rainfall were recorded in 1 hour, and therefore vineyards become rice paddies, very difficult to be managed. What about the effects of climate change on viticulture? First of all, an early ripening, fewer phenological phases, a reduction in the titratable acid content, a higher pH, which means that we favor bacteria at the expenses of yeasts, a reduction in the aroma. There's a lack of balance between technological ripening and phenolic ripening, and on the soil, a reduction in the organic matter content. Our soils have an organic matter content below 1%. With the global warming, risk is to reduce the amount of organic matter in the soil. And this especially for training systems with the, for example, the counter espalier or the counter espalier. In that case, we have more burnings on the canopy and burnings of the bunches with a worsening, with a poor quality. So reduction of production, a reduction of the economic income of farmers. Now, what could we do with the existing vineyards? A lot of farms are now applying late pruning so as to delay the sprouting phase, so as to avoid late frosts. Well, there is also a modification in the height of the scaffolding of the vineyard in order to reduce the impact of damages caused by frosts. Now, to mitigate the high temperatures, use of antiperspirants, for example, choose of a kaolin, which is directly distributed in the canopy to mitigate the thermal excesses on the leaves and on the bunches. If we consider the soil, cover crops, manuring, use of compost, biochar, organic manuring are practices to be applied. And then we have biostimulants, choose of inactivated yeasts that can be distributed on the canopy and that can make our vineyards more resilient to climate change. About the new vineyards, first of all, we shall reconsider the north-south orientation of rows. From the genetic point of view, we are trying to breed rootstocks which are more resistant to dry conditions of the soil. Training forms with a horizontal canopy, because in this way we can reduce the quantity of direct incident radiation and we increase the diffused radiation so as to have a microclimate under the canopy, which is better fitted to photosynthesis. Increase in the distance, the planting distance. In the past, we used to speak about 6,000 grapevines per hectare, but we need a larger distance to reduce competition. Systems of protection against radiation, for example, some nets with a different percentage of shading and different color. Several trials were conducted in Sicily on Nero d'Avola, showing to what extent sheds can mitigate radiation effects. And then precision agriculture, variable rate irrigation, and also the new subsurface irrigation systems. In this manner, we can also reduce the quantity of water which is lost by evaporation from the soil. Subsurface irrigation is an extremely interesting topic. These are some indications about short-term techniques which have an impact on climate change, management of the canopy, for example, early defoliation, which is carried out when flowering is at 50–60%. In this manner, we've avoided the damages on the clusters. And it's because there is an adaptation of the berry to increasing values of temperature and to ultraviolet. Irrigation is very important. It is impossible to establish a vineyard without irrigation. Management of soil is also key. The pest control and disease control. We shall also take into account new phytosanitary emerging pests and pathologies. Microbiome of the soil is very important. That's to say, the soil has a microbial activity. A biodiverse soil allows us to transfer the microbiome into the glass. Microbiome is very important. It is a concept which is key for the management of the vineyard, for the management of crops. If the root system falls within a well-balanced soil system, performance of plants is excellent. And you see here the effects of cover crops, not only on the earthworms, but on the microbiome. There are several effects which are extremely important. These are some other effects from the literature about biochar in viticulture. You see the positive effects not only on the yields, but also on the values of photosynthesis and also on the water conductivity in the soil. There's this chapter about the soil management, which is going to take center stage. Well, these needs have also been acquired at national level. Our ministry, the Italian Ministry of Agriculture, is also granting funds to the farmers applying sustainable agricultural practices. This is a chapter about cover crops. We can speak of natural cover cropping, but there are species that in different environments and in different combinations can produce differentiated results. Cover cropping of a part of the row is important. For example, in a warm and dry area like Puglia, and as is most of the Italian territory, we cannot speak of total cover cropping, but the cover cropping of a part of the row can produce advantages. The leaching of nitrates, leaching of nitrates, for example.
Troppo avanti. Era questa qua. No, avendo due slide, e quindi i vantaggi anche sulla
You see the advantages also on the pathologies, development, organic matter in the soil, and so on and so forth. And you see here lots of combinations from the traditional ones which are already used. For example, this is used in the Mediterranean area, which produces advantages also in terms of organic matter. In warm areas, we can have 100 units of organic nitrogen. There are also other complicated combinations with the triticale and the veccia in the vetch. The cultivation is 40 centimeters and the water is withdrawn at a depth of 800 meters. This means that the increase in the organic matter and the water retention capacity of soils with organic matter allows us, in situations in which water costs more than €1 per cubic meter, it is still possible to apply good agricultural practices. Another more complicated combinations, in this case we have 10 species, importance of brassicas, not only for the activity beneficial to the pollinators, but also in consideration of the biofumigation, the reduction in the number of nematodes in the soil, and also the structuring effects of the soil, and the importance of having differentiated mixtures to be tested in the various environments. This is a picture. This picture was taken at the end of May, or other situations, other conditions in warm environments with a growth of shoots at 5 centimeters. In that case, we can apply roller, which allows us to have a better nitrogen to carbon ratio resulting from the biomass that we can bury. For table grapes, organic farms resort to the cover crops, to the green manure, which is differentiated. This is a mixture of cover crop with clover and bean. Sometimes there is also a combination with Phacelia in order to attract Franklinelia occidentalis. And here, the importance of brassicaceae. I'm a beekeeper, and it is important to have sources of nectars, not only for bees, but also for the wild pollinators with effects on plants. These are soils in the area of Castel del Monte, soils with a reduced growing layer. And this is a comparison of different techniques for the management of soil: mechanical tillage, cover crop of a part of the interrow, and then alternate cover crop, green manure. For Nero di Troia, which is a typical variety of Castel del Monte, this is the winter time, the importance of checking the effects of cover crops on the gaseous exchanges of the soil, or the CO2 quantity, which is usually released, because the management of the soil has an impact on the quantities of CO2. Soil as a stock of carbon farming, and it is important to check and measure these variations. The effects of cover crops directly on photosynthesis. These are the first results. After 1 year of a cover crop, you see here the trial with the cover crop shows a higher level of a refractometric level. If you see the composition of wine, there are considerable differences according to the combination. In 2022, you see the Brix degrees, which are highly differentiated. The trial with the typical soil tillage have a lower refractometric content, anthocyanin content. In the next slide, the remote control is not working. Remote control is not working.
È la trasmissione lenta? No, se no sembro imbranato io.
These are the effects on the vigor indices. Soil tillage, in part, a greater value, which is expressed as the weight of the pruning residues and the main weight of the cane. Data of 2023, most interesting trials show the presence of a cover crop, a green manure, or a classical cover crop between the rows. And now, for the climate change, decision support systems are key predictive models about the management of past pest diseases, of irrigation, of nutrients supply, which means having a monitoring network grid and all these data that converge into a cloud system. And the data are available, are real-time available for agronomists or for farmers.
Utilizziamo il computer, dai.
technical issue. Just few minutes and they will resolve it.
Sì. Questa sì.
Sì. Quindi guarda se uso questa.
No, aspetta, penso che lui chiede.
Mi fai 40 minuti, già passato 40 minuti.
Mm?
40 minuti avevo a disposizione.
No, 30.
Ah, tu hai dato 40.
Non ho detto 30.
40. Quando sono troppe slide, può essere.
Può essere un po' lenta la presentazione.
È meglio qua.
Vediamo se riesci. È il nostro genio.
Che faccio? Quale? Ah, ok. Provo? Sì, perfetto. Sicuramente l'agricoltura di precisione ci consente
Precision agriculture is also based on variable rate irrigation, variable rate fertigation, use of drone-based or satellite-based data to have an idea about space and time variability of vineyards, to provide indications about production inputs. The phytosanitary management is also crucial, based on predictive models, but it also envisages the supply of products in a differentiated manner. And indications are provided not on the basis of liter per hectare values, but on the basis of systems that allow to real-time monitor the volumes on the canopy. These are some indications, and therefore it is important to apply monitoring steps in the vineyards, decision support systems, and also automation for the management of the crop. One of the problems in agriculture is the shortage of labor force, and automation systems become pivotal. IoT systems, much more performing effective than in the past. You see the camera here, the camera which allows us to have a real-time assessment of the leaf surface and canopy volume. The characterization of water content in the soil provides indications about the management of irrigation, or the advanced systems of the soil water content. This is a new system that measures the water content in the soil, which is not impacted by soil salinity values, or other differentiated sensors to measure the leaf wetting or the agrometric and thermal conditions of the canopy. It means that from volumes per hectare to volumes based on the development of the canopy will be applied. With these systems, with this new camera, we can gain a dynamic idea of the variation in the leaf surface as well as the canopy volume. So this is the evolution of the situation, and we can adjust the volume of the canopy, and we can adjust also the volumes of water on the basis of the evolution of the canopy. This is an example of variable rate treatments. Together with the monitoring of the canopy and the quantity of the plant protection products reaches the target, and this is modified according to the size of the target. We do not have drift problems and no leakage of the plant protection product onto the soil. Other methods to know the water conditions of the plant is the leaf angle, and there are sensors about that. And this is a way to reduce the administration of plant protection products. Because although viticulture is a very small amount of all crops, utilizes 60% of plant protection products. Genetic techniques, or the most evolved techniques, can make resistant rootstock or resistant varieties available, because the genome of the grapevine has already been characterized. These are the genes of resistance to powdery mildew and downy mildew. And you also see the importance of the spreading of vineyards resistant to downy mildew in Italy. In Italy, we are not authorized to grow these varieties, but in many other regions, vineyards are already available. We can also taste wines obtained from resistant varieties. These are the sources of resistance. My institute, the CREA, has been involved in research activities. This is Glera, the area of Valdobbiadene in the north of Italy. 30 donors of resistance. These are the first vines which have been established over the years. This is a Glera persolaris, which is resistant to Plasmopara and to downy mildew and to powdery mildew, with several multi-loci resistance. And this is a Glera Pe Bianca, another variety which is resistant to downy mildew and to powdery mildew. This is the behavior of the resistant grapevine. This means that several techniques of soil management can be applied, or techniques which are differentiated on the basis of the different pathologies to be managed. And all these systems allow us to produce typically Italian wines that are sold throughout the world. Thank you.